I stared at the lease agreement in my trembling hands, feeling my blood turn to ice. My own house had been rented out to strangers while I was dodging bullets in Afghanistan. HOA President Patricia Thornfield had forged documents claiming I'd abandoned my property, then leased it for $2,800 a month, and kept every penny. She was collecting rent on my father's house where 3 generations of my family had lived while I served overseas. I couldn't help but laugh standing in my driveway at 2 a.m., watching strangers unpack into my childhood bedroom. These suburban dictators thought they could prey on deployed soldiers and hide behind fake legal authority. But here's what Patricia didn't know. I wasn't just any soldier. I had 7 battle-tested brothers who just pulled their leave time to come home and teach this HOA what happens when you mess with military families. Oh, this was going to be beautiful. What would you do if strangers were living in your house? Drop a comment. You're about to see the most satisfying HOA takedown in history. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. My name's Jake Martinez, and I'm a 3rd-generation Army man. My grandfather fought in Korea. My dad did 2 tours in Vietnam. And me? Well, I've been playing hide-and-seek with the Taliban for the better part of a decade. I inherited this house 2 years ago when my father lost his battle with cancer. It's nothing fancy. A 1970s ranch on 1.25 acres in suburban Colorado. The kind of place where you can still hear coyotes at night, and your nearest neighbor waves when they drive by. Dad paid it off working construction for 30 years. Every nail and board chosen with the stubborn pride of a man who knew what honest work looked like. When the neighborhood got incorporated 5 years back and suddenly we had an HOA, I'll admit I grumbled about it. But Dad said, "Jake, sometimes you got to play along to get along." So I signed the papers, paid my dues, and figured that would be the end of it. I should have known better. The texture of my father's worn leather tool belt still hangs in the garage, smooth from decades of his callous hands. Walking the property line, I can still hear the crunch of gravel under his boots as he taught me to measure twice, cut once. These aren't just memories, they're the foundation of who I am. Then I met Patricia Thornfield. Patty, as she insists everyone call her, is 52 years old with a blonde bob so perfect it looks like it was assembled by German engineers. She drives a white Lexus SUV with real tour vanity plates and has never met a pastel outfit she didn't love. She lives in an $800,000 Sense McMansion with her dentist husband and speaks in that fake sweet voice that sounds like honey but tastes like poison. 3 years ago, she got herself elected HOA president, and that's when things started going sideways. See, Patty has very specific ideas about what our neighborhood should look like. Ideas that apparently don't include modest ranch houses owned by single soldiers who spend more time overseas than at home. 6 months into my deployment, I got a certified letter that made my blood pressure spike even in the Afghan heat. A $2,400 0-cent special assessment for a new community center. Now, I'm all for community improvements, but when I looked at the breakdown, something stank worse than a Porteati in August. My modest house was being charged the same amount as the $250,000 homes down the street. I sent a polite email explaining that the assessment seemed disproportionate and asking if we could work out a payment plan. Patty's response arrived 3 days later, dripping with condescension. "Mr. Martinez, military deployment doesn't exempt anyone from community obligations. Payment is due in full within 30 days, or the HOA will be forced to pursue legal action. Legal action against a deployed soldier for a community center I'd never asked for and would barely use. I arranged for my military pay to cover the mortgage, utilities, and basic maintenance on autopay. Mrs. Chen, my 73-year-old neighbor, who still brings me homemade dumplings, agreed to check on the house monthly. I thought I had my bases covered. I was wrong. The violation started small. Grass half an inch too long, mailbox the wrong shade of beige, an unauthorized vehicle when Mrs. Chen's grandson borrowed my driveway during a family barbecue. Each violation carried a $50 per day fine that compounded faster than interest on a payday loan. But here's the thing that really got under my skin. During one of our video calls, Mrs. Chen mentioned seeing Patty standing in my driveway, hands on her hips, talking to another woman about how she was tired of eyesore properties dragging down values. My father's house, the place where 3 generations of my family had lived, worked, and served our country, an eyesore. That's when I knew this wasn't about grass height or mailbox colors. This was personal. Month 8 of my deployment, I opened my email to find a digital nightmare. 23 violation notices. 23. The charges were so petty they'd make a parking meter jealous. Unauthorized vehicle in driveway for when Mrs. Chen's grandson visited. Landscape non-compliance because dandelions had the audacity to grow in my yard. Structural disrepair for a paint chip the size of a dime on my garage door. Each violation came with its own $50 daily fine, compounding like a financial plague. Do the math with me here. 23 violations, $50 a day each. That's $1,150 per day in fines for a month. We're talking about $34,500 zero in penalties for crimes against suburbia that would make a monk weep. But the real T-punch came when Mrs. Chen called me crying. This woman who'd survived the Cultural Revolution, who'd raised 5 kids as a single mother, who'd never asked anyone for anything in her life, was sobbing into the phone. Jake, honey, they served me papers. That woman says I can't check on your house anymore. She says I'm trespassing for taking care of a deployed soldier's home. That's when I knew I needed to fight back. I contacted the Military Legal Assistance Office at Bram. Turns out there's this thing called the Service Members Civil Relief Act, SCAR for short. It's a federal law that provides legal protections for active military, including delays in civil proceedings and reduced interest rates on pre-service debts. The bottom line, you can't steamroll deployed soldiers with legal nonsense while they're getting shot at overseas. I fired off a certified letter to Patty, invoking my SE protections and demanding an immediate freeze on all fines and violations. I also filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Attorney General's office. 2 could play the legal game, and I'd learned a thing or two about strategy in the Army. For about a week I thought I'd won. The violations stopped, the threatening letters paused. I actually managed to sleep through the night without dreaming about $50 dandelions. Then the real mini twist hit. Patty responded with a 4-7-page document that made my head spin. She called it a property maintenance agreement and claimed my father had signed it in 2019, 6 months before his cancer diagnosis. According to this supposed contract, Dad had allegedly waived all SCA protections and granted the HOA emergency maintenance authority over our property. The document was pristine, suspiciously pristine for 4-year-old paperwork. It looked like it had been printed yesterday and artificially aged with coffee stains. But there it was, complete why. That what looked like my father's signature, giving Patty carte blanche to do whatever she wanted to our house. Sitting in my tent, reading this document on my phone, while 110 degrees Afghan heat tried to melt my brain, my hands started shaking with rage. Not from the temperature, from pure crystalline fury. This woman was desecrating my father's memory, forging his signature, and using his death as a weapon against his son. But Patty wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. She hired a property management company to handle the emergency maintenance. Turns out this company was owned by her brother-in-law, Rick, whose primary qualifications seemed to be owning a riding mower and being married to Patty's sister. Rick started billing me $4,000 a week for emergency lawn maintenance on a property that Mrs. Chen had been maintaining for free. When I called to protest, Patty's voice dripped with fake concern. "Oh, Jake, I understand you're upset, but we have to protect property values for all residents. Your neighbors shouldn't suffer because of your situation. My situation, like serving my country, was some kind of character flaw." Here's where it gets funny in a twisted way. I actually started joking with my sergeant that fighting the Taliban was easier than fighting my HOA. At least the Taliban were honest about wanting to kill me. Patty just smiled and sent invoices. My savings account, which had taken me 3 years to build up to $8,000, started hemorrhaging money faster than a punctured fuel tank. Between the bogus fines, the emergency maintenance fees, and the legal costs, I was down to $1,200 zero. My military pay barely covered the inflated HOA demands, let alone normal living expenses. Other deployed soldiers in the neighborhood started reaching out. Turns out, I wasn't alone. Patty had been systematically targeting military families, always when the service member was of races, always when they were most vulnerable. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about every soldier who'd ever trusted their community to have their back while they served overseas. This was about every family that had sacrificed for something bigger than themselves, only to come home and find vultures picking at the bones of their American dream. Patty had made a critical error. She'd picked a fight with the wrong soldier. Month 11 brought a new level of psychological warfare that would have impressed Sun Tzu himself. I opened my email to find a notice that made my blood run cold. Notice of lien filing. The HOA was placing an $18,000 lien against my property for unpaid assessments, fines, and emergency maintenance costs. $18,000 for dandelions and paint chips. But attached to that notice was a letter that revealed Patty's true intentions. She wasn't just trying to bleed me dry. She was trying to steal my house. Dear Mr. Martinez, the letter began in that sickeningly sweet tone. Continued non-compliance with community standards will result in foreclosure proceedings. However, the HOA board is willing to work with you to resolve this matter amicably. We have several interested buyers who might be willing to purchase your property for a reasonable amount, allowing you to avoid the embarrassment and financial burden of foreclosure. Translation: pay us, or we'll take your house and sell it to our friends. Mrs. Chen started seeing strange cars in my driveway. Patty would show up with clipboard carrying strangers, walking around my property like they owned it, measuring rooms, and discussing rental potential. Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, started secretly photographing these visits from her kitchen window. Something told her we'd need evidence later. That's when I decided to bring in the big guns, my unit's legal assistance officer. Captain Sarah Morrison reviewed every document Patty had sent. What she found made her laugh out loud in the middle of our video call. "Jake," she said, holding up the supposed property maintenance agreement. "This document was never properly notarized. Look at the signature block. There's no notary seal, no witness signatures, no official authentication whatsoever. Here's a knowledge nugget for you. Contracts affecting real estate generally require notarization and witnesses to be legally binding. Without proper notarization, Patty's magical maintenance agreement was worth less than the paper it was printed on." Captain Morrison helped me file an emergency injunction through military legal channels. We also reached out to the local TV news military affairs reporter, a former Marine named Tom Rodriguez, who had a soft spot for deployed service members getting screwed over by bureaucrats. But Patty wasn't going down without a fight. She started a whisper campaign that would have made Joseph McCarthy proud. Suddenly, neighbors were hearing that I was an unstable PTSD case who shouldn't own property. She lobbied the city council to declare my house a nuisance property and pushed for emergency condemnation proceedings. Reading her character assassination emails, I could taste copper in my mouth. That metallic flavor of pure rage that comes when someone attacks. Not just you, but everything you stand for. She wasn't just trying to steal my house. She was trying to destroy my reputation, my military career, and my future. The psychological warfare was working on my neighbors, too. People who used to wave at Mrs. Chen started avoiding her, afraid of HOA retaliation. The community dad had loved, where he'd barbecued with neighbors and loaned tools to anyone who asked, was fracturing under Patty's reign of terror. But something beautiful started happening. My platoon back at BA-C started a GoFundMe campaign, help our brother fight HOA abuse. The story went viral in the military community faster than gossip in a small town. Within 48 hours, we had $15,000, 0 cents in donations and messages of support from veterans across the country. Local VFW and American Legion chapters offered legal support. I started getting emails from fellow veterans sharing their own HOA horror stories. One Marine from Texas wrote, "They tried the same thing with my wife while I was in Iraq. Fight the good fight, brother." Reading those messages in my tent at 3 a.m., I realized this was bigger than just my house. I was fighting for every military family that had ever trusted their community to have their back. I was fighting for the idea that serving your country shouldn't make you a target for petty tyrants with clipboards and attitude problems. So, I decided to set a trap. I called Patty and put on my best defeated voice. "Look, I can't fight this anymore. I'm willing to sell the house to settle all the debts. Just make me a fair offer and let's get this over with." I could practically hear her salivating through the phone. "Oh, Jake, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. My brother-in-law Rick has been looking for an investment property. He might be willing to take it off your hands for, say, $15,000. 0 cents below market value to account for all the violations and repair costs. $15,000 below market value for a house that needed maybe $300. 0 worth of touch-up paint. And here's the beautiful part. Colorado is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations you're part of without the other person's knowledge. Every word of Patty's greedy, grasping offer was preserved for posterity. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for her to walk into it. Month 14 brought the kind of betrayal that makes your faith in humanity take a law. On walk off a short pier, I was sitting in the chow hall picking at mystery meat and powdered eggs when my phone rang. Mrs. Chen's number. She rarely called during the day, so I knew something was wrong. "Jake, honey," her voice was shaking. "There's a moving truck in your driveway. A family with children. They're moving into your house." I dropped my fork. "What do you mean moving in? That's impossible. The woman that Patricia, she's here with papers. She told them they're the new tenants. She said, you abandoned the property and she has legal authority to rent it." My mind went blank. For a solid 30 seconds, I couldn't process what she was telling me. Rent it? Rent my house? The house my grandfather had helped my father build, where 3 generations of my family had lived. "Mrs. Chen, can you see the license plate on the moving truck? Can you take pictures?" 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with photos that made my stomach drop. A U-Haul truck, boxes labeled Tommy's room and kitchen stuff. A young couple with 2 kids, maybe 6 and 8 years old, carrying belongings into my father's house like they belonged there. And there was Patty, clipboard in hand, smiling like the cat that ate the canary. I called the local police. The dispatcher was polite but firm. "Sir, if they have a legal lease agreement, this is a civil matter. You'll need to contact an attorney." A legal lease agreement for my own house. While I was deployed, the sound of children's bicycles on my driveway during the video call with Mrs. Chin broke something inside my chest. Not anger this time, something deeper. These were innocent kids who thought they'd found a new home. They were victims too, just pawns in Patty's game. Now, my commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, took one look at my face during our next check-in and said, "Martine, you need emergency leave. Whatever's happening back home, it's eating you alive." I was on a transport plane within 72 hours. The Military Legal Assistance Office hooked me up with a civilian attorney who specialized in SC violations, a bulldog of a woman named Rebecca Torres, who built her career defending military families from predatory practices. When I showed her the rental agreement, she started laughing. "Jake, this is beautiful. She's handed us everything we need to bury her." Turns out the rental was never approved by the full HOA board. According to Colorado law, major decisions like renting out private property require a majority vote of the board members. Here's your knowledge nugget. OA boards can't unilaterally rent out private property without explicit legal authority and owner consent. Patty had acted alone, which made her actions not just unethical, but criminal. Rebecca subpoenaed the HOA financial records, and what we found was like discovering a gold mine full of evidence. Patty had been skimming money from multiple special assessments for years. She'd used $47,000, 0 cents, in HOA funds for personal expenses disguised as administrative costs. Her brother-in-law's landscaping company didn't even have a valid business license. But here's where it gets really good. The rental wasn't just unauthorized, it was profitable. Patty was charging the tenant family $2,800 a month for my house and keeping every penny as payment toward HOA debts. She'd also pocketed their $5,600 security deposit. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If I handled this wrong, an innocent family would be homeless through no fault of their own. But if I didn't fight back, I'd lose my inheritance and let Patty get away with systematic fraud against military families. Local news picked up the story. Deployed soldier fights HOA over stolen home. The headline alone was enough to make my phone ring nonstop with reporters, veterans advocate, and angry neighbors who were finally learning the truth about their HOA president. My drill sergeant called from Fort Carson, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Martinez, I heard you're famous now, fighting HOAs instead of insurgents." "Hell, I always said conquering Afghanistan was basic training for dealing with suburban bureaucrats. Even in the middle of this nightmare, I had to smile. There was something brutally honest about military humor that cut through all the political correctness and got straight to the truth. Rebecca and I were building our case when she found something in the archived county records that made her eyes light up like Christmas morning. She leaned back in her chair, grinning like a wolf who just spotted a wounded deer. "Jake," she said, "Patty just made the mistake of her lifetime. She didn't just steal your house. She's been operating illegally for years, and I can prove it." She wouldn't tell me what she'd found, just smiled and said, "Some surprises are worth waiting for." But Becca Torres spread the county documents across her conference table, like a poker player, revealing a royal flush. What she showed me changed everything. "Jake, your HOA doesn't legally exist." I stared at her. "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" "I mean, Patricia Thornfield has been running a criminal enterprise for 5 years, masquerading as a homeowners association." Rebecca pointed to a filing from 2018. "Look at this incorporation paperwork. It's incomplete. Missing signatures, missing state filing fees, missing the actual legal incorporation under Colorado statute." The words hit me like an artillery shell. "Here's your knowledge nugget. HOAs must be properly incorporated under state law to have legal authority over private property. Without proper incorporation, they're just neighborhood bullies with no legal standing whatsoever. Every lien, every fine, every violet ion notice Patty has issued for 5 years is legally worthless," Rebecca continued. "She's been collecting money under false pretenses. That's fraud. Federal fraud." But the rabbit hole went deeper. Rebecca had traced Patty's systematic targeting of military families during deployments. She'd stolen 3 other homes using identical tactics: forged documents, inflated fines, emergency maintenance scams. Her real estate business had profited over $400,000, zero from buying distressed military properties at below-market prices. Then Rebecca showed me the smoking gun, an email chain between Patty and city officials discussing cleaning up undesirable military housing and improving neighborhood demographics. The racism was subtle, but unmistakable. Comments about transient military families and maintaining community standards that had nothing to do with property values and everything to do with who she thought belonged in her perfect suburb. "The FBI White-Collar Crime Division is very interested in this," Rebecca said, tapping a business card. "Agent Martinez, no relation I assume, wants to meet with you tomorrow." The power dynamic had completely flipped. Instead of Jake Martinez, desperate deployed soldier fighting for closure, I was now Jake Martinez, key witness in a federal fraud investigation. The weight that had been crushing my shoulders for months suddenly lifted, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But here's the beautiful irony. Patty had no idea her HOA was invalid. She was still operating under the delusion that she had legal authority, still issuing violation notices, still planning the forced sale of my house at a sheriff's auction scheduled for next month. The FBI suggested we let her continue digging her own grave. Every action she took while believing she had legal authority was another felony count. Every dollar she collected was another coup, NT of fraud. Every violation notice was another piece of evidence. My father would have loved this moment. He always taught me that bullies eventually hang themselves if you give them enough rope. Patty had been weaving her own noose for 5 years, and she was about to find out what happens when you pick on the wrong family. Rebecca and I had to make a strategic decision. Do we reveal our hand and stop Patty immediately, or do we let her commit a few more crimes to ensure the federal case was bulletproof? "How many other families is she targeting right now?" I asked. "At least 6 that we've identified, 3 active military, 2 deployed." The answer was obvious. We couldn't let other families suffer while we built a perfect legal case. But we also couldn't tip our hand too early and let Patty destroy evidence or flee. "What if we warn the other families without alerting Patty?" I suggested. Rebecca smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Agent Martinez has a plan that should protect everyone while giving Patty just enough rope to finish the job. For the first time in months, I felt like I was back on offense instead of defense. The hunter instead of the hunted. Patty thought she was closing in for the kill, but she was actually walking into the most elaborate trap of her criminal career, and I was going to enjoy every second of watching it snap shut. The VFW hall on Kfax Avenue smelled like coffee, determination, and old tobacco. At 600 hours on a Saturday morning, 8 of my brothers-in-arms sat around a folding table covered with legal documents, laptops, and enough caffeine to fuel a small war. My platoon had pulled their leave time to come home and help me fight this battle. These weren't just soldiers. They were a precision instrument of specialized skills, wrapped in desert camouflage and righteous anger. Sergeant Mike Wrench Rodriguez, our unit mechanic, cracked his nuke, Kless. So, we're taking down a suburban dictator who thinks she can steal houses from deployed soldiers. I've been waiting my whole career for a mission this satisfying. Staff Sergeant Lisa Code Williams, our IT specialist, was already tapping away on her laptop. Give me 12 hours, and I'll know everything about Patricia Thornfield from her credit score to her browser history. The team was perfectly suited for asymmetric warfare against HOA tyranny. Besides Ranch and Code, we had Corporal James Legal Thompson, who'd finished his paralegal certification before deployment. Specialist Danny Hammer O'Brien, a carpenter who could assess property damage to the penny. Sergeant First Class Maria Doc Santos, our medic turned forensic document expert. Staff Sergeant Tony Com, who could coordinate media coverage like a military operation. Private First Class David Demo Chang, whose post-Army electrical contracting business was about to come in very handy, and Sergeant Logistics Lopez, who could organize a supply chain in his sleep. Rebecca Torres laid out our multi-pronged strategy like a battle plan. Legal track. File criminal complaints with FBI, State Attorney General, and local district attorney. Document every violation of federal SCAR and protections. Financial track. Forensic accountant would trace every stolen dollar from HOA accounts, freeze Patty's assets before she could hide the money. Media track. Coordinate with sympathetic journalists for maximum exposure. Military Times, local TV news, and veteran advocacy groups were already interested. Community track. Organize other HOA victims for class action lawsuit. Turn Patty's neighbors against her by revealing the financial fraud. Direct action track. Peacefully reclaim my property with overwhelming community support and legal backing. Here's your knowledge nugget. Always request detailed HOA financial statements. You have the legal right to review them annually. Most HOA fraud happens because residents don't exercise their oversight rights. Code's digital reconnaissance revealed Patty's biggest weakness, her ego. She'd been bragging on social media about her military housing cleanup and posting photos of properties she'd improved through foreclosure. She'd literally created a digital evidence trail of her crimes. Look at this, Code said, projecting Patty's Facebook page on the wall. She posted about finally getting rid of transient military families who don't appreciate community standards. Posted it 3 days ago with a picture of your house. The psychological operation was elegant in its simplicity. We created fake interested buyer personas to waste Patty's time and document her illegal sales tactics. Hammer would assess damage to my father's house from the illegal modifications. Demo would check if Patty's brother-in-law had pulled proper electrical permits for any work. The community mobilization was already happening organically. A local military spouse started a Facebook group called Justice for Jake that grew to 800 members in 48 hours. Local businesses began displaying support our veteran signs. The mayor's office received over 300 calls demanding an investigation. Wrench provided moving trucks to help the innocent tenant family relocate temporarily while we sorted out the legal mess. We weren't going to punish them for Patty's crimes. You know what's funny? Legal Eagle said reading through HOA bylaws, even if this HOA was legitimate, half the stuff she's done violates their own rules. She never got board approval for the rental agreement. She never disclosed her financial interest in the property management company. She's been embezzling from accounts that don't legally exist. Doc had been quietly examining the forged property maintenance agreement under a magnifying glass. Jake, look at this signature. The ink is wrong. Your father allegedly signed this in 2019, but this ink formulation wasn't available until 2021. She used a pen that didn't exist when your father was alive. The smell of victory was starting to mix with the coffee and determination in that VFW hall. We had evidence, we had a plan, and we had the best team a soldier could ask for. But logistics raised the critical question: what's our end game? We could destroy her tomorrow, but how do we make sure this never happens to another military family? And that's when I realized this wasn't just about getting my house back. This was about changing the system that allowed predators like Patty to exist in the first place. We're going to make her famous, I said, and then we're going to make sure every HOA in America knows what happens when you mess with military families. The operation would culminate at the monthly HOA meeting, which Patty didn't realize was legally meaningless. We'd invited local TV news, state legislators, and military officials as observers. Time to show Patricia Thornfield what real community organizing looked like. Desperation makes people dangerous. And Patty Thornfield was about to prove that in spectacular fashion. 3 weeks before the planned HOA meeting, Code intercepted emails that made our blood run cold. Patty had realized the investigation was closing in and had shifted into full panic mode. Her response wasn't to come clean. It was to double down on fraud. She'd created backdated HOA and corporation documents, complete with forged signatures from board members who'd never agreed to serve. She'd bribed a notary public named Janet Cruz with $2,000 zero to certify false dates on the paperwork. But here's where it gets really criminal. She attempted to destroy the original county records through an accidental water leak in the filing office basement. Fortunate lie. The FBI had already secured copies of everything. The sabotage attempt came on a Tuesday night. Wrench's motion-activated cameras caught Patty's brother-in-law, Rick, sneaking around my property at 2 a.m. with a crowbar and a sense of purpose. The plan was elegant in its stupidity. Damage the house enough to justify emergency demolition, then claim it was uninhabitable and had to be sold immediately to cover cleanup costs. Rick broke 3 windows, damaged the roof with a hammer, and flooded the basement by disconnecting the water heater. The sound of breaking glass echoing through Mrs. Chen's security footage was like listening to someone destroy my childhood one crash at a time. But Rick had made a critical error. Demo had installed hidden cameras throughout the house when we discovered Patty's illegal rental. Every act of vandalism was captured in high-def color, complete with Rick's face clearly visible and audio of him muttering, "Patty said, make it look like wear and tear." The FBI surveillance team got it all. Agent Martinez called me at 6 a.m. with barely contained excitement. "Jake, she just handed us conspiracy charges on a silver platter, and the best part, she doesn't know we're watching." We let Patty believe her sabotage had worked. She called the city building inspector, claiming my house was a public safety hazard, requiring immediate condemnation. She lobbied the city council with falsified engineering reports about structural damage. She even staged photos of the vandalism to look like natural deterioration. Meanwhile, our forensic accountant had uncovered offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands containing $127,000 in stolen HOA funds. Patty had been preparing to flee the country if her house-stealing scheme fell apart. But the smear campaign was where Patty really showed her true colors. She created fake social media accounts to spread rumors that I was a dangerous veteran with PTSD who threatens neighbors. She posted fake screenshots of threatening messages allegedly from my accounts. She even sent anonymous letters to my commanding officer claiming I was mentally unstable and unfit for duty. The character assassination was so over the top that it backfired. Code traced every fake account back to Patty's IP address. The FBI had recordings of her coaching neighbors on what to say if reporters asked about my violent behavior. She'd literally scripted testimonials about my supposed mental health issues. Reading her fabricated psychiatric evaluation that painted me as an unstable threat, I could taste that familiar copper flavor of rage. But this time, it was mixed with something else. Pity. This woman was so desperate to justify her crimes that she was willing to destroy a veteran's reputation and military career. The community response was swift and brutal. When Patty's fake social media campaign was exposed, local veterans organizations issued statements defending my character. The VFW posted security footage of me helping elderly members with yard work. The American Legion shared photos of me volunteering at their charity drives. My platoon arrived in Colorado Springs wearing full-dress uniforms for what we called Operation Suburban Justice. The sight of 8 decorated combat veterans conducting a wellness check on an innocent tenant family sent a clear message to the neighborhood. We take care of our own. Local news coverage intensified as 3 TV stations, the Colorado Springs Gazette, and a military blog began following the story daily. The headline, "Deployed Soldier Fights Fraudulent HOA," was trending on military social media. But here's where Patty made her final desperate play. She offered my attorney, Rebecca Torres, $50,000, zero in cash to settle this matter quietly and preserve everyone's reputation. When Rebecca refused and reported the bribery attempt, Patty threatened her family and law practice. She called the State Bar Association with false ethics complaints. She hired a private investigator to follow Rebecca's children to school. That's when the FBI decided they had enough evidence. Agent Martinez showed me photos of Patty's increasingly erratic behavior, screaming at City Hall employees, threatening neighbors who supported me, and making a scene at the post office when they wouldn't accept her falsified legal documents. She's unraveling. Agent Martinez said people this desperate make mistakes, big ones. The final mistake was coming, and it would happen in front of 200 witnesses and 5 television cameras. With 48 hours until the showdown, Patty Thornfield entered full meltdown mode. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in how not to commit federal crimes. Her final desperation play started with an envelope full of cash. $50,000 in 20s and hundreds delivered to Rebecca's law office by a nervous teenager who clearly had no idea what he was carrying. The note inside was handwritten on Patty's personal stationery. This unpleasantness benefits no one except this gesture of goodwill, and we can all move forward. 50 grand to make a federal fraud case disappear. When Rebecca immediately reported the bribery attempt to the FBI, Patty's response was to threaten her family. Phone calls to Rebecca's home at 2 a.m., anonymous letters describing her children's school schedules. A private investigator following her husband to work. But here's where Patty's desperation turned genuinely dangerous. She contacted my commanding officer with fabulated allegations that I was selling military equipment on the black market. She sent forged documents to the Army Criminal Investigation Division, claiming I was involved in drug trafficking overseas. She even created fake social media profiles claiming to be members of my unit, posting stories about my supposed violent behavior in Afghanistan. The Army took these allegations seriously enough to launch an investigation. For 72 hours, my military career hung in the balance, while investigators verified that every single accusation was fabricated. The stress of potentially losing everything I'd worked for, my house, my reputation, my career, was like carrying a 100-pound pack through desert sand. But Patty had made a critical error. Military investigators don't mess around, and they quickly traced every fake document, every forged email, every fabricated social media account, back to her IP address. Instead of destroying my career, she'd added federal charges for filing false reports against a service member. The character assassination reached peak absurdity when Patty hired actors to pose as concerned neighbors at a city council meeting. They read prepared statements about my aggressive behavior and threats against community safety. The performance was so rehearsed, it sounded like a middle school play. Two had been monitoring all of this through digital surveillance that would have impressed the NSA. Jake, she's created 17 fake social media accounts in the past week. She's paying for promoted posts claiming you're a dangerous veteran. And get this, she's been sending anonymous tips to news stations trying to spin herself as the victim. The community response was swift and brutal. When the fake neighbor testimonials were exposed, real neighbors started coming forward with their own stories of Patty's harassment and intimidation. Mrs. Chin organized a counter-petition supporting me that gathered 400 signatures in 24 hours. The FBI surveillance captured Patty's increasingly erratic behavior. Agent Martinez showed me photos of her screaming at bank employees when they wouldn't process work. E-transfers to her Cayman Islands accounts, security footage of her throwing papers at the county clerk when they refused to file her backdated HOA documents. Cell phone video of her having a complete breakdown at Starbucks when the barista asked her to lower her void. She's unraveling in real time. Agent Martinez said, "People this desperate make catastrophic mistakes." The catastrophic mistake came when Patty tried to bribe city officials to fast-track condemnation proceedings on my house. She offered the building inspector $25,000 to declare my property uninhabitable. She promised the city planning director a consulting contract worth $100,000 if he'd approve emergency demolition. All of these conversations were recorded by FBI wiretaps. But the final straw was when she threatened the innocent tenant family living in my house. When they refused to lie about the property's condition, Patty told them their rental application had been misrepresented to immigration authorities. She threatened to have them deported if they didn't support her version of events, threatening an immigrant family with deportation to cover up your own crimes. That's when I knew Patty had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. My platoon's final preparations were like watching a military operation unfold in suburban Colorado. We had 3 TV stations committed to live coverage, newspaper reporters positioned throughout the crowd, and social media streaming capabilities that would reach thousands of viewers in real time. The local veterans organizations provided legal observers, Military advocacy groups sent representatives from Washington, D.C. Even the state attorney general's office dispatched prosecutors to witness the confrontation. But the most important witness would be Sheriff's Deputy Maria Santos, Doc's sister. As it turned out, she'd be positioned in the community center wall, with arrest warrants ready to serve. "You know what's beautiful about this?" Wrench said as we synchronized our watches like the old days. "She thinks she's walking into a community meeting to destroy your reputation. She has no idea she's walking to the end of her criminal career." The community center was booked to capacity. 200 angry neighbors, dozens of veterans, local media, and law enforcement. Patty had scheduled her own public execution, and she didn't even know it. Operation Suburban Justice was about to reach its climax. The community center felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. 200 people packed into a space meant for half that number. The air was thick with tension, sweat, and the electric anticipation that comes before justice finally shows up fashionably late to the party. Live television cameras from 3 local stations were positioned around the room. Social media streams were broadcasting to thousands of viewers. Military Times had sent their top investigative reporter. Even C-SPAN was considering coverage. Patty Thornfield walked into that room like she owned it, which was ironic considering she'd never legally owned authority over anyone. She wore a powder blue suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying a briefcase full of forged documents, and the kind of confidence that only comes from 5 years of getting away with federal crimes. She didn't notice the sheriff's deputy's position throughout the crowd. She didn't recognize the FBI agents pretending to be concerned neighbors. She had no idea that half the audience was law enforcement or media waiting to document her downfall. My platoon sat in the front row, 8 combat veterans in dress uniforms, ribbons and medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. We looked like an honor guard for American justice. Batty called the meeting to order with theatrical authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to address a serious threat to our community's safety and property values. Mr. Martinez's abandoned property has become a liability that requires immediate action." She projected photos of my vandalized house, the same damage her brother-in-law had caused with a crowbar and criminal intent. "As you can see, this property has deteriorated to the point of being a public hazard. The HOA board has voted to exercise emergency authority to protect our neighborhood." The crowd murmured. Some people who didn't know the full story actually nodded in agreement. Patty was playing her role perfectly, the concerned community leader protecting innocent neighbors from a dangerous veteran's neglect. Then she made her fatal mistake. "Some people," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "don't deserve to own property in our neighborhood. Military families who treat our community like temporary housing, who don't understand our standards, who bring their problems home from overseas." The room went dead silent. You could hear the cameras clicking and recording devices humming. That's when Rebecca Torres stood up, briefcase in hand, and delivered the line I'd been waiting months to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have something to show you." The projection screen lit up with county records, official documents, FBI evidence photos, financial records showing $380,000 cents in stolen funds. The smoking gun that would end Patricia Thornfield's criminal career in front of everyone who'd ever believed her lies. For 5 years, Rebecca announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. "Miss Thornfield has operated a criminal enterprise, not a homeowners association. The HOA was never legally incorporated. Every lien, every fine, every violation notice issued under her authority is legally worthless." The audience erupted. Shouts of disbelief. Angry. Neighbors who'd paid thousands in bogus fines. Elderly residents who'd been terrorized by fake legal threats. Rebecca continued over the chaos. "Miss Thornfield has stolen nearly $400,000, 0 cents, from residents through fraudulent assessments. She's forged legal documents. She's committed mail fraud, wire fraud, and bribery. She systematically targeted military families for theft during overseas deployments." Patty tried to run. She literally grabbed her briefcase and headed for the exit, but Sheriff's Deputy Santos was waiting by the door. "Patricia Thornfield, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of public officials, and violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act." The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the suddenly silent room. Patty's face went from entitled indignation to pure terror as the reality of federal prison time sank in. FBI agent Martinez stepped forward with the final evidence. "We have recordings of you planning to get rid of military families and discussing how to clean up undesirable housing. We have bank records showing theft of HOA funds. We have video evidence of you directing the vandalism of Mr. Martinez's property." The media swarm was instant. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, social media notifications pinging like slot machines hitting jackpot. But the most beautiful moment came when my platoon stood at attention and saluted, not me, but the idea that justice still existed in America. 8 combat veterans, honoring the principle that serving your country shouldn't make you a target for suburban predators. Mrs. Chen presented me with a folded American flag that had flown over my father's grave. Through tears, she said, "Your father would be so proud. You fought the good fight." The crowd gave us a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Local news interviewed neighbors, who apologized for believing Patty's lies. The Tennant family thanked me for not evicting them during the legal battle. But the moment that made it all worthwhile came when I addressed the cameras with the words that would go viral across military social media. "No veteran should come home to find their house stolen. We fought overseas to protect American homes. We shouldn't have to fight HOAs to live in them." 6 months later, justice had been served with all the fixings. Patricia Thornfield was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2,300,000 in restitution to her victims. Her brother-in-law Rick got 3 years for conspiracy and vandalism. The notary who helped forge documents lost her license and got 2 years probation. Even Patty's private investigator faced charges for harassment and stalking. But the real victory wasn't Patty behind bars. It was what happened to the community she'd terrorized for so long. I took 30 days of leave to restore my father's house, and something beautiful happened. My platoon showed up every weekend with tools, cold beer, and the kind of brotherhood that makes civilians wish they'd served. The sound of laughter filled those rooms again as we replaced broken windows, repaired the flood damage, and painted over the scars of Patty's sabotage. In my father's workshop, I found a letter hidden behind his tool cabinet, his handwriting shaky from chemotherapy, but still strong with conviction. "Jake, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably facing something that seems impossible. Remember what I taught you. Stand up to bullies, protect the innocent, and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Fight the good fight, son. Make me proud." I had to sit down for a minute after reading that. The old man knew exactly what I'd need to hear. The neighborhood formed a legitimate, veteran-friendly HOA with me as the unanimously elected president. Our new bylaws included specific protections for military families, transparent financial reporting, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. What a concept. An HOA that actually served the community instead of terrorizing it. The ripple effects spread far beyond our little suburb. Colorado passed the Service Remembers HOA Protection Act, giving deployed military enhanced legal protections against predatory practices. 12 other states introduced similar legislation. Congress held hearings on HOA abuse that featured my testimony and led to strengthening the federal protections. I established the Deployed Defenders Foundation with the settlement money from Patty's seized assets. We provide free legal assistance to military families facing HOA harassment. We've partnered with the VFW to create rapid response legal teams in every state. So far, we've helped 847 military families fight back against suburban tyrants who think a clipboard makes them untouchable. The Foundation's first major project was partnering with the local law school to create a pro bono legal clinic, specifically for military families. Law students get real-world experience while veterans get the legal help they've earned through service. On a personal note, I decided to use my GI Bill for law school, specializing in military family advocacy and real estate law. Turns out fighting one corrupt HOA president gave me a taste for justice that I can't shake. I'm planning to run for state legislature on a veteran rights platform, because if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that good people have to be willing to fight for what's right. Oh, and I'm dating Rebecca Torres now. Turns out there's something attractive about a woman who can destroy your enemies with legal documents and proper citations. We're taking it slow, but she's already impressed my platoon B. Yout drinking wrench at the VF. Every summer, I host the Freedom Barbecue in my father's backyard. Veterans, Neighbors, former enemies turned friends, and yes, even the tenant family who got caught up in Patty's scheme. They're all welcome. The smell of charcoal and the sound of children playing where I learned to be strong reminds me why we fought so hard to save this place. Last month, we planted a memorial tree for my father, surrounded by the community that fought alongside me. Mrs. Chen brought homemade dumplings. My platoon brought stories that made everyone laugh until their sides hurt. Even the mayor showed up to thank us for cleaning up the neighborhood. The tree is a Colorado blue spruce, tough enough to survive anything and beautiful enough to make you stop and appreciate what you've got, just like the community we've built from the ashes of Patty's corruption. So, here's my challenge to you. Share your HOA nightmare in the comments. You're not alone, and together we can fight back against petty tyrants everywhere. And subscribe for more stories of ordinary people breaking corrupt systems right back. Next week, I'll tell you how a teacher exposed her principal's embezzlement scheme using nothing but cafeteria receipts and the kind of determination that changes everything. Sometimes the system breaks good people, but sometimes good people break the system right.